I don't know how many of you guys regularly work with designers. Often design are subtle things. Things you might not see at first, some small little things. And one of them is page transitions. That felt awkward. It was tiny, but it felt awkward. And this is the problem of page transitions. If you have a page like this, oops, sorry, and you click here, it takes a second, and here. It doesn't add to the user experience at all. You have some people who spend a lot of time trying to make cool animations for opening the page. So I click here, you see, it's nicely animated, but every time you have an ugly flash, and that destroys the whole point of these things where you spend a lot of time. And this is actually one of the big differences to apps. The way why apps often feel faster and nicer is not because they are faster. It's just there's a transition, and so people have to experience something is loading, something is going on. So if you click and it's not, nothing happens, but there's a transition, and then the loading runs in the background, it makes it way nicer. So the good thing, there's a spec. Here you can define the page ender, side end, yeah. The bad thing, it's IE, and it was like developed 10 years ago, and it's really weird syntax, and you can not use it. So the first step, what you can do is you can optimize the time the page rendering needs, because when you open the first website, all the CSS is cached, everything. So actually, if you reduce the time for page rendering, it feels nicer. So what you can do is, instead of this weird long page rendering time, this is the drawing, you can reduce it, which makes it nicer. So if you click and you have a fixed layout which doesn't depend on images and things like that, it feels like there's almost nothing. But if you need an image, you again have flashes. One solution for this is there's a HTML tag called Prerender, and it gives you the option, if you're pretty sure that someone will, as a next step, load another page, you can do prefetch, preload, and pre-render to not have these flashes, or minimize them at least. But we're still not at the state where apps are, and because we're still missing the transition. So what's actually nice is if we click and we have some kind of animation which changes the content. So here in the background we load stuff, but there's an animation and it feels like something is going on, and so the time moves faster. And this is where SmoothState comes in. SmoothState is a simple library which uses Ajax to load the, basically, if you first open the page, nothing is different. As soon as SmoothState had the time to load and initialize, when you click a link, it will detect the link, make an Ajax request. In the meanwhile, you have time to make a nice animation, and then it replaces your current HTML with new HTML, which has the advantage you don't have any rendering flashes. It uses push state if available, so the URLs are updated. So in modern browsers, it gives you the ability to make a nice page transition, and everything seems normal. All the URLs work. You don't have to make these weird hash URLs like you sometimes have in single page apps, which makes the whole thing way more complex. And it's totally progressive enhancement. So you turn it off for mobile devices maybe. It doesn't work on all IEs and all things, but it always works fine. To start, it's pretty simple. You define a main content area. That's the part which should be replaced. And then you say SmoothState. And then it looks for link clicks and then loads the full HTML from the server. picks from the full HTML the content area and replaces it. Of course, it can be way more complex, and you can add a lot of transitions and things. But these are things which I believe are not that nice to hear in a talk. I could tell you 10 different configuration options, and you'll not remember them. It's really good documentation, and I think in 15 minutes you're up and running with a basic site transition, which just makes it nicer. So these are typical page transitions they are giving as example, and it's done in a few minutes and really nice. Thanks. Any questions?
Loading question. What happens if I have a listener, for example, like in Dubai, a lot of pages going to do that?
On the load?
For example, yeah.
You basically have a secondary event which is on Ajax page load. Okay. So SmoothState fires an event, and you can listen on that event and instead do your thing on that. Okay. If you have a lot of JavaScript, which is not modularized in a nice way, like with an init function, but kind of like spaghetti code, you have to do some adoption. So if you're doing a WordPress theme and you use like typical WordPress plugins, which we all know how the code looks, you'll not have much fun. If you develop your own, it's actually not so hard to implement, because you just create for your JavaScript thing an init function, and then you just trigger that on Ajax page load instead of page load, or on both. Yeah, that's it. Any other questions? All right.